What's going on, everybody? My name is Justin. I'm excited to connect with you guys today. I know y'all were probably expecting to see RJ on here today, but we're going to be going over some stuff on the dispo side of things today. And for those of you who don't know, RJ doesn't sell shit around here. I do. So also for those of you who don't know, a little bit more background info on myself. I've been with RJ for about the last 3.5 years. I've closed deals in 37 different states. I've talked to thousands of investors. So what we're going to be talking about specifically today is how to set up expectations with your buyers prior to a walkthrough. This is a very important topic. So the reason this is so important is because multiple times in the past, I have personally dealt with situations where I set up a walkthrough with the buyer. If it was tenant occupied, owner occupied, and I ran into multiple situations where my buyer threw off the deal here. He messed something up during the walkthrough. So he had conversations with the seller. He had weird conversations with the tenants that made the tenants feel uncomfortable. Then that led to them going back to the seller, which led to the seller coming back to me. So all of that because we didn't properly set up expectations in the beginning. So multiple times in the past, we were so focused about just collecting our assignment fee, getting the deal done. We tried to cut corners pretty much and tried to go without having those conversations and just hope for the best. And there was a part of me, I had some limiting beliefs a couple of years ago that if I was to try to go to my buyer and have that conversation with them prior to that walkthrough, that somehow I was coming off unethical, or I was going to ruin the relationship I had with that buyer, or somehow I was going to kill the deal with him. So I was afraid to have that conversation and I was being lazy about it. But this led to us getting screwed on multiple deals. So that made us realize there's a fault in our process. So we ended up we implemented this to where we actually do have these expectations set with buyers. We have SOPs set for all of this. But there was a situation I came across personally about 2.5 years ago. It was a property that I had under contract in Phoenix, Arizona. So the property was under contract. I got it at $80,000 and we were asking $100,000. So $20,000 assignment fee. That is where my mind was at on that deal. So whenever I posted the deal, I got a walkthrough set up with the local investor about 3 days later. All I'm thinking about during the time that I'm setting this walkthrough up and everything is I'm about to make $20K on this deal. And we get to close, I get to make my money. And that's where my head was at. So I was trying to cut corners, didn't really want to have that conversation with the buyer. So he went out there and about 3/4 of the way through that walkthrough, he turns to the seller and says, I don't know if I could pay $100,000 for this property. I think I'd be coming in closer to 90. As you know, our seller was under contract for $80,000 and that threw them for a loop. They're looking at the buyer going 190, like where are these numbers coming from? So because of that, because the buyer didn't know what conversations were and were not appropriate to have with the seller, that led to the seller then giving me a call and then me having to fully explain the situation and alleviate everything and then solve the deal. We actually did end up closing on that deal, but it led to more complications on the back end than there needed to be. So if we would have just set proper expectations in the beginning, we would have never been in that position. But you not setting expectations ahead of time is setting yourself up to fail. So regardless of the occupancy, the buyer should be giving you notice before he walks that property and after he leaves that he left, he locked everything up, lights are out, all of that. So this is for safety and liability purposes, of course, but the back end, whenever he lets you know that he left, that's a great point. That's a great point in time for you to have the conversation of what's your feedback on the walkthrough? What was the condition? Is there anything that was different? Are you going to be buying this? What's your offer? All of that. It's just a great time for a follow-up after the walkthrough. But let's say if the property is vacant, the conversation, how does that conversation need to look with the buyer? So you need to say, hey, Mr. Buyer, the property is vacant, regardless where the key is at. Let's say there's a lockbox, you need to give them the code, but you need to make it clear that once they go out there, they need to lock up all the doors after, turn off all the lights, leave everything in that house as they left it whenever they got there. So as far as the key needs to be placed back in the lockbox. If it's a hide key, it needs to be placed back there. And we typically ask for photos to be taken from our buyers afterwards, just so that we can get confirmation all is good to go. Now, if the property is tenant occupied, conversation is going to be a little bit different. So this does happen every now and then with rental properties, of course. So the buyer needs to be needs to know that they are not to disturb this tenant in any way. So the conversations that they have with them are to be very minimal. They could be off topic, I guess, but they cannot be in there talking about the closing dates, the new rent numbers, all that kind of stuff. Anything that would make this tenant feel uneasy, that after the walkthrough they could potentially call the seller and start causing problems. We want to avoid that. We don't want to cause any problems for our seller due to not setting the expectations with our buyer on what was appropriate to talk about with the tenant. Now, if the property is owner occupied, this is most important that you set expectations here properly, because this is your seller. So if the property is owner occupied, you need to make it clear what conversations are appropriate and which ones are not appropriate. So any conversations about the contract price, any potential changes in price, if something goes wrong in the condition, or discussions about closing, all those conversations are to be had solely between us and the end buyer, not between the buyer and the seller. We're the only point of communication between us and the seller, and then the title company. They do not need the buyer in their ear, making them feel uncomfortable or trying to drive a wedge between us. So if they do end up talking, they can talk about off-topic stuff, or the seller knows more about the subject property than anyone else does. So if the buyer goes out there and he's walking it and they're having a conversation regarding the condition or certain items on the rehab, that's perfectly fine, because again, the seller knows more about that house than anyone else. The buyer's buying it as an investment, so they need to know exactly what they're getting into. So going over pertinent details like that with the seller, that's of no issue. But any conversations regarding numbers, contract price, assignment fees, any of that kind of stuff, that is not to be had. And in our contract, it protects us against those kind of things if that were to happen. But the buyer is there specifically for assessments, rehab bids, PPOs, informal appraisals and inspections, all of that. It is not to have any kind of conversations with the seller that could potentially throw off the deal. So that is pretty much setting expectations with buyers in a nutshell. If you don't set proper expectations ahead of time, you are setting yourself up to fail. This is just a small bits and piece of one of the things that we teach you guys, especially inside of the university. So hope this was helpful for you guys. Come join the Titanium University and look forward to seeing you guys. Peace.